The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Matthew. Another parable Jesus put before the crowds. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? He answered them, An enemy has done this. The slaves said to him, Then do you want us to go and gather them? But he replied, No, for in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers, Collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. Then he left the crowds and went into the house. And his disciples approached him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field. He answered, The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all evildoers. And they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. Well, top of the morning to everybody. So how are your ears? How is it listening to the readings rather than reading them? Good. Always great to come into the church and find out you're preaching on a different parable. Anyways, parish happenings. So, once upon a time in a sweaty place, very humid place, under a big tent, a Pentecostal minister was preaching on the gospel from this morning. And he preaching about hellfire and brimstone, and he came to the part about the end of time, and he said, and brothers and sisters, he said, at the end of time, in the fires of hell, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Weeping and gnashing of teeth. An older gentleman at the back of the church and the pews got up and he said, Parson, he said, what if he ain't got no teeth? Parson, without blinking, said, brother, teeth will be provided. Not to worry. Teeth will be provided. When you're a relief pitcher or a substitute priest or Norm likes to call me the closer every once in a while. Whatever you are, when you're not the real thing, in terms of being a rector, when you come to preach, you ask the Lord for clarity, but you also hope and pray that you'll get good lessons to preach on. It will come easy and all kinds of great things floating through your mind and heart that you can preach on. And have good passages to preach on. And the first week I was here 2 weeks ago, man, that was a great passage. I get into that, and I was rocking and rolling, and it was really good. Then last week, a parable. And then this morning, another parable. And parables, sort of a lot of times, are scratch-your-head types of lessons. Last week, for those of you who are here, and that's most of you, I'm happy to say, last week it was the parable of the sower sowing the seeds and the different types of ground and the different ways that people receive the gospel, the seed. This week we're back in the fields again, and it's about the wheat and the tares, or the wheat and the weeds, or the wheat and the chaff, whatever you want to call it. It's the parable of the wheat and the weeds. And this is an interesting parable on a lot of levels, tough on a lot of levels, to understand and to hear. A parable, as I said last week, is a short story told by Jesus as a mode of teaching, a short story that has not only the surface meaning that he explains in the last 2 weeks anyway, but also the root word parable means to throw alongside. So alongside the exposition we can understand, we also have another meaning, a deeper meaning. Today, of course, the surface meaning is what Jesus said. The weeds and the tares grow together. You don't want to rip up the weeds, because in ripping up the weeds, you might pull out the wheat. And let both grow together, Jesus says, because at the end of time, God will take care of the wheat, who separate the wheat from the weeds. But underneath this parable, one of the meanings is this: we need to be careful about pulling up the weeds. The church has a long history of having people who are judging other people in the parishes and in the church as a whole as not being up to snuff in terms of their faithfulness sometimes, in terms of their spirituality, in terms of what they believe. And the church has a long history of judgmentalism within it. And this parable, by the way, is written in the Gospel according to Matthew. And Matthew, according to scholars, wrote his Gospel, or put together his Gospel between 75 and 85 A.D. for a century. That was what, 40 to 50 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus and the coming of the Spirit. And this time a church was fully functioning, and already there were problems, and that's why this particular parable is put into this gospel, because at Matthew's time his church was having trouble with people who were judging other people about their faithfulness and their spirituality, and were they up to snuff in being Christians. And always the temptation is, well, let's yank out the weeds. We want a pure form of Christianity, like us, all up to snuff. We don't want these other people in here. Let's pull up the weeds and yank them out. The issue is the same. Let both grow until the harvest. Judgmentalism is not our business as parishioners. Not our business. It's God's business. God will judge who is faithful and who is not. Only God knows the hearts of each one of us. And so we can forget about this judgmentalism. We can pray to God to wipe that out of our hearts and souls, because it's not our business as Christians. Saying who's wheat and who's weeds. Now, clergy have to be very careful of this, of course, because they have a leadership position. And this is a very, very, very important thing about our spirituality as clergy, because we're in a position of authority, as quote unquote, and we can make decisions that influence others and the lives of us. So we have to be very careful about this. Of course, I've had a very little problem with this particular type of thing, because early in my seminary, well, not early in my seminary, about the third year of my seminary in pastoral theology, Doc Kramer was our professor, and he was talking to us about this parable. And just sort of as an aside, he said, if you birds get out of here and get ordained, and if you get as far, and he always calls us birds, if you get as far as finishing your ministry and you go to die and you go to heaven, he said, you're going to be shocked about several things in heaven. He said, first of all, there's going to be a lot of people there who you didn't think were there. We're going to be there. And a lot of people you thought were going to be there ain't there. So you get over this judging stuff right now. There is no pure Christianity. There is no pure parish, There's wheat and weeds everywhere you go. And you're not the one that's going to be pulling weeds out, to make a pure community. So you can forget about that. And he said, furthermore, he said, if you think you're pure, he said, you look outside. This was Chicago in the winter. And I looked outside. I was sitting near a window. He said, now, we're all of us, about as pure as the driven slush. And if you can get that in your mind, you'll be okay. And I did. I got it in my mind. We all have our problems. We all have our failures. We all have weaknesses. So to be judging is not our business, and especially for clergy, not our business to be doing that. Okay, so that's one thing we can take from this parable. Forget about judgmentalism. Second thing is, for me, this is a parable about inclusion as opposed to exclusion. The parable of the weeds and the wheat. Don't pull up the weeds. You'll hurt the wheat. It's a parable of inclusion versus exclusion. Now, again, the church has a long history, to be honest with ourselves, which we must at all, of excluding people. We've excluded people by race, by gender, by sexuality, anything. On and on it's gone. And little by little, we're battling this, and it's a hard spiritual problem to deal with. But it's always gone on in the church's history from the beginning. And just as a reminder of this past week, of course, on the 14th of this month, last Monday, in the Los Angeles Times, way at the back of the Los Angeles Times, past the murder and the mayhem and the wars and the butchering and the killing and everything else, it talked about the grand old institution of the Church of England. And the Church of England, it said in a little small article, the Church of England, after centuries of excluding women, now voted at York Minster this past Monday to allow women to be bishops in the Church of God. Yeah. But this is a long time coming, you see. We got over this part of exclusion now, you see. It's a tough thing. The weeds and the tares is a tough thing, you know. You see? But judging is not ours, you know. And we're here to include, not to exclude. And so are we all as individual Christians, all as individual Christians, to deal with inclusion and not exclusion. So that means a lot of things, but one of the things it means to me is we all, as ministers of the gospel by our baptism and disciples, are here to include, and that means to invite, to be outreaching to people, to bring people to God through Jesus. And that means not just ushers and hushers, and not just people who are in business and sort of on committees to invite people and to welcome people, but all of us need to be aware of people who are new, who are here for the first, second, third, or fourth time, to be inviting to them, to invite them in, not only into the church, but also invite them into the coffee hours, invite them to participate, invite them to move from the back of the church where most new people come in and stay for too long a time, and get them up toward the front. You see? It's all a matter of, but it's not just my business or the Father Norm's business or any priest's business. It's everybody's business to do this, to be inviting, to be dealing with inclusion, bringing people. Now, throughout the biblical history, a lot of people would say, well, who are the top-notch apostles of the first 12, for example? And everybody say, well, Peter, yep, and probably John and James, because those three were with Jesus at very important times of his ministry. And you'd be right to think that and say that. But for my money, it's Andrew who's very important. Andrew, the apostle, Andrew. He's known throughout the Bible. You don't hear about him much. When you do, he's always said, well, there's Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. Now, that always bugged me, you know, it still bugs me. How would you like to have an identity with no identity? I mean, how would you like to be Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, you know, like you're second class right away because you're not, you know, Peter's better, you know that, Peter. Well, good news on Andrew. He appears at least 3 times. First time, guess what? It's Andrew who first is attracted to Jesus and listens to Jesus. And what does he do? He goes and invites his brother Peter to come and see Jesus. Now there you go. Numero uno was Andrew to meet Jesus, and Andrew was the one who invited Peter to come to Jesus. And he did, and the rest is history, as they say. All right. Now, if it wasn't for Andrew with Peter, I don't know, you know, but Andrew did his important ministry. Second time we hear of Andrew, is out in the wilderness. Jesus has huge crowds at the beginning of his ministry. They're out in the wilderness. It gets dark. There's no food around. People are hungry. What are we going to do? How are we going to feed all these people? And Andrew stepped up, and he says, you know, I have a young lad here who has 5 barley loaves to Jesus. I got 5. What are they about among so many, though? And so, because Andrew invited this young boy to Jesus, he became the conduit of the feeding of the 4,000 or 5,000 people. That's Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. The third time we hear, and the final time we hear of Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, is at a huge religious festival of the Jews in Jerusalem. Huge Passover. Very Jewish festival. Some Greeks show up at the festival. And they come into Jerusalem and they go up to a group of Jesus' disciples and said, "We'd like to see Jesus. We've come from Greece. We'd like to see Jesus." Who brings them to Jesus? You got it. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. Yeah. Brought these non-covenantal, non-Jewish, non-covenant people who probably weren't even to be spoken to at that time to bring to the popular Jesus. You see? Andrew, invite. And we need to do all we can to make this a place of invitation, of inclusion rather than exclusion. It says so in our bulletin. Radical welcome, it says there. So we need to have a place that's that way. And we need to have a place where we can function to do this ministry. And one of the ways we're going to do that is this morning we're all going to make a pledge, I hope, to bridge the gap financially here so that we can have a place where we can invite people and we don't have to worry about real estate all the time and money all the time, that we get on with inviting people to God through Jesus Christ. So that's part of being a disciple. Invite. Don't exclude. Remember Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. So, judge not, Jesus said, lest you be judged. Judging is not our business. Jesus again said, why are you worried about the speck in your brother or sister's eye, and you don't pay any attention to the huge log that's in your own eye? We all got problems. Judge not. Don't pull up the weeds. You might hurt the wheat. Let both grow to the harvest. It's God's business. Those of us who have ears to hear the parable, let us hear.